Now, the fastest way to empty a church building, other than a fire alarm, is to use the word evangelism. I have discovered that, and nobody comes back. And so I was going to do, because that's what I did for years in Brazil. That's all I've done ever since I became a Christian, is do training in evangelism and outreach. And we had thousands, I trained hundreds of volunteers, about 600 a year would come and we'd spend time training, and they would reach hundreds each year during the clinic. And so the majority of my time was spent with new converts. And because we had hundreds, well, really about a couple thousand each year. And so it was always concentrating on new converts the whole time. And the 5 things or 6 things that we did all the time was, one, people needed to know how to live by faith, how to overcome temptation, how to read the Bible, how to hear God, and how to, overcome the Christian life, live the Christian life. So that's all I did for 30 years. And but I don't know what your needs are. We had 7,000 volunteers come down during a year, and I would ask them, what is your number one issue that you face in the Christian life? What's the number one issue? And well over 60-70%, the number one issue that kept coming up over and over again is, I don't know how to hear God. I don't know when God is speaking. I don't know how to hear God. Now that raises all kinds of questions in my mind immediately. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, and they follow me, and they know me. And I would ask people, how long does it take you to learn how to hear the voice of God? And I would say, if you're married, how long did it take you to hear your husband or your wife? How long did it take you to hear them, to recognize their voice? And some of them would say, well, just a few hours. Well, very shortly. And I could hear my husband or wife. If there was a crowd and I hear a group of people talking and I heard them, I'd know, oh, there she is, there he is, he's talking. So I took my children to school, carpool, and one day on the way to school, my 15-year-old, I asked him, I said, how long do you think it would take you to learn to hear when God is speaking? And he turned to me and he said, well, I guess that all depends upon how much time you spend with them. And so that's a critical point, how to hear God. Another thing is how to overcome temptation, how to deal with temptation. And we dealt with that. I would ask people a room, maybe a little bit more than this. I would ask them, how many temptations are there? And they would always say, oh, there's dozens, hundreds of them. Okay, well, let's start writing them on the board. And the most I ever got to do was 15, 20. That's the most temptations I ever came up with. There's not hundreds, there's not thousands, there's just a handful. I mean, there's only 10 commandments, so there can't be hundreds of temptations if there are only 10 commandments. And then throw in a handful that Jesus put out there. How do you overcome temptation? Is it impossible? And 1 Corinthians 10:13, there is no temptation taken you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above what you are able, but also give you a way of escape. So is there an excuse for temptation? And according to that verse, there's no excuse. Can a person sin without being tempted? Or do you always get tempted first and then sin later? And so once you analyze it and really take a look at it, it's not all that difficult to overcome temptation. It's not that difficult to really live a victorious Christian life. We've got it in our mind that it is, but it's not really that difficult. And now another area that deal with is how to keep the commands of Christ. Now, I did this towards the last half of my time in Brazil, when I'd go into a group like this, we'd start talking. I'd usually have the people there for several hours or several days after another, and I would ask the people, how many commands are there of Jesus? And I said, okay, let's start writing those on the board. How many commands are there? We start writing them on the board. Because you see, the command that Jesus left us in Matthew 28 is teach them to observe the commands that I'm leaving you. Teach them to observe them, how to do them. If we were going to deal with the commands of Jesus, teach the commands of Jesus, we could do that probably in about 10, 15 minutes right now. We could cover all of them, just if we're going to list them. I've got a little book that's got a booklet there that said the commands of Jesus, and this guy's listed about 40 of the commands. You can sit there and just read that little book real quick. But that's not what he was talking about, obeying the commands of God. So how do you do them? How do you do the commands of Jesus? And so what I would ask, okay, what command do you want most? What command is the most difficult command for you to keep? And then we'd list those on a board. And say, which one do you want to deal with? And they say, well, I want to deal with that one. And you probably wouldn't be surprised which one. The one that comes up most is, how do I forgive people that offend me? That was the number one. Usually they'd always want to say, how do I do that one? How do I forgive people and forget and love one another? How do I go about doing that? That's the one that I want to know. But when in so much preaching, and I'm not criticizing preachers, but most of the time it's just, there's not no how to it. There's not a lot of how. It's just do this, do this, but not a whole lot of how. And so I started working on my messages, and you may have seen it a little bit. It's just what and so what. It's what are you supposed to do? Now, how are we going to do it? How do we do this? Because it wasn't just teach the commandments. It was teaching them to observe the commands of Christ. Teach them to do it. We got to do something. And how to live by faith is another issue. So that's what I'm thinking about, moving in the direction a little bit. Because I talked with Fadi a couple of days ago. He's probably talked to you. I asked him, I said, well, what do you want me to do? You want me to keep coming? Are you going to find somebody else? What you going to do? You know, how am I? I was asked to do this one month. I said, I enjoy it. The doctor gave me a clear bill, so I don't have any health issues that can keep going. And the people seem to be responding fairly well. Nobody said, hey, I'm tired of this. So it seems to be going all right, but it's up to you. So, whoever you guys up there that are running the show, whether or not you want me to keep going back or not. But I enjoy this. I mean, I've been doing this long enough, I can talk forever. But I want to make sure that I'm on target. Because the other thing that I would like to do, and I don't want to overstep my bounds, I would like to maybe even visit with you a little bit, to talk to you, to hear your story, if I could do that, if you want to. In other words, it's hard to target a message if you don't know your target, if you don't know what the needs are. And so I just wanted to adjust that. So just respond any way that you would like to. Anybody have any comments on up to this point?
I like everything you said, especially the things that we have to deal with, the commands of Jesus. I like that, the way you were pointing that out into the sections like that. And the response too, I think is good. People would respond. If we would all just talk about, after you get through, talk about it, or point out things, like you said on the board, which one do you have the most trouble with? I don't know if I'd want to tell everybody, but.
Well, the thing is, what Paul says, there's no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. Everybody's got the same temptation. Maybe not exactly, to the point. Some people might be tempted to steal from a bank, and some people might be tempted to steal from their neighbor, or from the kids. I mean, you got, there's different types, the different points.
Ray, are we talking about believers here, or are we talking about non-believers too?
Both, to help a non-believer overcome temptation is one issue, if that's what you're talking about. But primarily believers is how to help them. Paul said, my goal is to teach every person to live a perfect life in Christ. That's the goal, to present every man perfect in Christ and woman perfect in Christ. So that's what I'm talking about here, right here in this group.
Where do you think the greatest commandment that Jesus said, to love the Lord our God with all heart, soul, mind, and strength, where do you think that plays into things that Jesus commands us not to do and to do? You think it's supreme?
Well, that's a critical point. It is the, if we did do that study, it is the number one command, and it is the reason all the other temptations, we fail in all the other temptations. You're not gonna lie about somebody you love. You're not gonna steal from somebody you love. You're not gonna worry about, if you think God loves you, you're not gonna worry about things. And now, most people, when we deal with what are the temptations, they always deal with the negative ones, don't hurt, kill, lie, cheat, steal, so. But most of the time, it's never mentioned the things that we're supposed to do, like not to worry and be kind to one another. It's easy to not do the negatives, like hurt somebody or kill somebody, shoot somebody, steal from somebody. It's easy to do those relatively well, but it's the positive ones that give us the real problem. And we can keep on going with this one, but when you look at how to live by faith always stems back to loving God. Have y'all studied experiencing God by chance?
I have.
Okay. Well, I didn't bring that with me, but most people don't understand how the Christian life works. Once we understand how it works, then we can figure things out. When I was going to seminary, I worked as a mechanic in Fort Worth, and the shop was a high-end shop. All we dealt with was Cadillacs, Continentals, those kind of cars, and it was an interesting place because I knew a lot about cars, but I didn't understand about how to work on that level of cars. And one of the things, it's not that way anymore, but if you had a vacuum leak in a car, it didn't run smooth. Well, they gave us a car in Brazil, a brand new Ford, and it never ran right. So I took it to the Ford dealership, and I said, the car's not running right. It runs rough. It doesn't run smooth. And they said, we can't find anything wrong with it. Well, listening to it, I knew it had a leak in it. I knew it had a vacuum leak in it. And it was brand new, and if I took it apart, it nullified the warranty.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I don't have any other choice. So I took a lot of carburetors apart back in the 70s. They don't even have them anymore. Anyway, I took it apart, and between the bottom and the second level, I could sit there and rock that thing back and forth like this. It didn't fit right. And so I said, well, that's where the leak is. So I said, well, I don't have any other choice. So I took it apart. It was made out of a very soft metal. And I started filing away on it to where it fit flat. And
The carburetor or the manifold?
the carburetor, the three parts. You got that base, you got the middle part, and then you got the horn at the top. But the second and third part, it didn't fit good. It wasn't fit. And once I filed it down, I said, man, if the transportation chairman knew I was filing away on this carburetor. But it went to working great afterwards. Well, this is the problem that I saw in the comparison to the average Christian. They don't understand how the Christian life works, and so they can't fix it. If you knew how it works, then you could fix it, and you could solve the problem. Well, to briefly speak, it works like this. You know God, you love God, you have faith in God, and you obey God. If a person is having trouble obeying God, they have trouble having faith in God, they have trouble with faith in God, they have trouble knowing God, and if they have trouble knowing God, they have trouble knowing God. And so it all starts with knowing God. That's the reason Jesus said in John 17, and this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. It all starts with knowing God. You don't love somebody you don't know. So if somebody says, I want to love God more, you gotta love him. You gotta know him. If you don't know him, you can't love him. If you don't love him, you don't have faith in him. And if you don't have faith in him, you're not going to obey him. And it goes back to Adam and Eve, specifically Eve. If you take a look at the core temptation that Jesus had, that Eve had, that Satan did, basically he said, God does not love you. God doesn't love you. If he did, he'd let you eat that. And then you would be like God. Your problem is God doesn't love you. Well, once that tinge of doubt about God's love, it was all downhill from there. It was over with. It was totally over with, because she said, yeah, I think you're right. God really doesn't love me, or he'll let me eat that. Now, if Satan could convince Adam and Eve, that God doesn't love them when everything was perfect, imagine what it's like today. God doesn't love me. I mean, my knee hurts right now because I got a little bit of arthritis. I'm a little bit of gout in it. Hey, God loved me, he wouldn't let my knee hurt. I know that. He just doesn't give a flip about me because my knee hurts. And I don't want my knee to hurt. And then I start thinking about it. And then it starts. So if a person said, I want to have more faith in God. I want to have more faith. Well, the problem is you don't know God. That's your problem. I mean, if I were to come up to you and I were to say, do you trust your wife? Oh man, you must be some kind of super believer to be able to trust your wife. How in the world can you trust your wife? That's incredible that you trust your wife, or your wife trusts your husband. You're an amazing person. Faith doesn't bring credit to the person, it brings credit to the person you believe. And so if a person has any trouble with God, believing God, they're going to have trouble obeying God. You're not going to obey somebody you don't trust. When we left Brazil, talking about living by faith, one of these days we'll go over that. But God worked situation after situation after situation. Might even call a miracle. Well, it came time to leave Brazil. God said, it's time for y'all to leave. And I said, wow. I knew this day was coming. I like it right here. I like it. Everything is going perfect for me. I've got my whole life lined out. I know exactly what I'm going to do. And wife and I, we would talk about things, She would say, I think it's time to leave. And I said, I don't think it's time to leave. The next thing you know, I think it's time to leave. She said, no, I don't think it's time to leave. And then all of a sudden, we both came to the conclusion it's time to go. And I hear people talk about they're working for a company or something and everything turns upside down. That never happened to me. It almost happened, but I said, I kind of like it this way. I know what I'm going to do. The beginning of the year, I have my schedule, my clinics, my training. Everybody, not everybody likes me, but a lot of people do, and I just like what I'm doing. I mean, this is great. Why would I want to mess all this up? And so some of the other missionaries said, Ray, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake. It's going to be a disaster for you. Y'all are going to starve to death. We've had a lot of missionaries leave thinking that they're going to keep on going and get a job somewhere. Say, hey, you're making a bad mistake, really bad. And I said, yeah, I guess you're right. I don't have a house. I don't have a job. I got a year of salary with IMB. And then after that, I better find a comfortable bridge to live under, But that's not totally true, because I was planning for this. We did have a house, 2 houses in in Houston, because I saw a lot of missionaries didn't plan ahead. I did plan that far ahead. And so we got here, and all of a sudden Brentwood Baptist opened up. Boom, there it was. And Sharon's been working there all this time. I went there for a while, and then association, but at any rate, I got to worrying. Well, the worry set in. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And sometimes the Lord takes you out beside the woodshed. And the Lord popped back to me and he said, you know what? After over 50 years taking care of you, you think I'm going to drop you now? I'm going to get ready to whoop you up, boy. You better straighten up. And I think of Elijah. When Elijah was taken up in heaven, you remember Elisha, the sons of prophets came back, said, we need to go look for him. We need to go look for him. See, now how was Elijah taken up into heaven? You remember how he was taken up?
Chariot of fire.
By the chariot.
Yeah, it was a chariot, but he wasn't inside it. It was a whirlwind that came along behind it. So he was just taken up in a breeze, And they were watching all this, and they said, most likely God dropped them somewhere along the way. God got him up there, and then he dropped them. And that's one of the biggest problems we have in a Christian life. God's going to take us so far that he's going to drop us. And I said, no, everything's going to work out all right. Everything's going to work out perfect. God's not going to drop me. And you know how many stars there are? That new telescope's found, they estimate there's 200 million trillion stars. Take a trillion and multiply that by 200 billion. That's a lot of stars. And you sit there and you meditate on that for a minute, and God says he's got a name for every one of them. And I said, sometimes you wonder, God, do you know I'm here? Well, look, if I can name 200 trillion billion stars, I think I can keep up with you. I know everything you've got going. And so basically, I know I'm rambling, I wasn't totally prepared for this, but if you know God, loving God is easy. And if you love God, faith in God is easy. And faith in God is easy. Obeying God is easy if you have faith in God. You're not going to obey somebody that you don't love. You're just not going to do it. And so it all goes back to knowing God. That's the biggest issue in the Christian life. So every time I read the Bible. That's all I'm talking about, reading the Bible. When you read the Bible, what do you learn about God? What do you learn about Him? What is there about Him that you know, that you learn by experience that will help you have faith in Him? And that will help you, well, back up, that'll help you love Him, and that will help you have faith in Him. I didn't do a whole lot of studying on covenant theology. It's not real popular in Baptist circles, covenant theology. But Tim Keller, is it Tim? Yeah, Tim Keller, up in Covenant Presbyterian in New York, he does covenant, he studies, he's covenant theologian. Now that's not necessarily, I don't want to chase a rabbit here, but that's not necessarily Calvinism, but it gets close to it, covenant theology. God makes a covenant. You read through the psalmist, Psalm in the 60s and 70s, Numbers, God said, I made a covenant with you, and I'm not going to break my covenant. I am not going to break it. Now, when my people disobey me, they're going to get a whooping, but I'm not going to break my covenant. I'm not breaking it. I'll never break it. The fact that there's a Jewish nation right now, after all they've done, is amazing. God is not going to break that covenant. A lot of people are worried I'm going to lose my salvation. If you ever got it, you're never going to lose it, because God's not going to break His covenant. He's not going to break it. He's not going to. Okay, you know, you messed up a little too much. You're gone. I'm not going to deal with you anymore. He's not going to break the covenant. So that's chasing a long way when we were talking about the temptation, that it all goes back to me, to loving God. And loving God all goes back to knowing God. Because you remember the 2 commandments. The guy asked him, said, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus said, it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. On this hang all the law and the prophets. So I was talking to a fella in Greece earlier this year, and he said, well, are you trying to tell me that a person could be sinless? And I said, if you could love God perfect, you could be sinless. Can you name a sin that you're going to do against another brother if you love that person? Would you lie about him? Would you steal from him? Would you hurt him in any kind of way? No, you wouldn't do it. Paul said, keeping the law is a fulfillment of all the law. All the law is fulfilled in this one word. Love your neighbor as yourself. Because loving God is keeping the law. Would you worry about God taking care of you if you loved Him perfectly? Nope, sure wouldn't. If you could. Now, how do you go about doing it? Now, that is the question. How do you go about doing it? You got to know Him. Years ago, I heard this Bible study. Moses. It says, Moses, God in Deuteronomy 3, he said, God made His acts known to the children of Israel, but His ways known to Moses. Moses knew God's ways, and He made His acts known to the children of Israel. Now, most of you in this room have been or are married now, right? Anybody never been married in this room?
Several times.
But what I'm trying to get to right now is that you know the ways of your spouse. You know the ways. You know those triggers, what'll make them mad, what'll make them happy. You know how everybody has a certain way of eating. Everybody eats a certain way. You know your ways. So God taught Moses his ways. So the question that I like. I got a list of them over a period of time, wrote out a list of the ways of God. You had to come up with a list of the ways of God. How many could you come up with? Do you know the ways of God? And he compared it to the eagle. You know how an eagle teaches its eagles to fly? Familiar with that story?
Shoves them out of the nest.
Huh?
Shoves them out of the nest.
Right. Well, they're shoved out, but they kind of want to go too.
Yeah.
When an eagle builds its nest, it makes it real. Because he said, I have taught you as an eagle teaches its littles to run, to fly. I've stirred up your nest. When an eagle builds its nest, it makes it real thorny at the beginning. There's big thorns down at the bottom of that nest. It's rough. And then it puts feathers and leaves, and grass, and it keeps getting softer and softer and softer and softer. And the eaglets, they're sitting there living on Easy Street. And the eagle said, it's time for you to learn how to fly. Come on, let's go. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving this place. No, sir. And so then it starts taking the grass out, start taking the leaves out, start taking the feathers out. And now the little bird's sleeping on thorns. That's not very comfortable. And so now the little bird wants to fly. And you know what, that verse, it sounds so sweet, so nice. He bears us up on eagle's wings. That is really not very nice. Because what the bird does, the little baby bird gets on top of the eagle, and then they go way, 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 way high. And the mama bird or papa bird turns them upside down. And so next thing, this little old eagle there, it was just doing all kinds of stuff, and just before it hits the ground, the parent bird flies underneath of it and catches it. And to do this again, go up, flip it upside down, and then it flops around. And so every time a storm comes or we get flipped upside down, it's not that God's being mean to us, He's teaching us how to fly. And we're either gonna learn to fly or we're gonna hit the ground. And we would rather learn how to fly. So that's where Paul said, over and over again, he said, I rejoice in the tribulations because they're gonna work good for me. But if we don't believe God is good, we're going to misunderstand the troubles. And first time something happens, I said, Lord, what are you doing? What did I do that I needed to have? Well, you messed up back then. Said, I'm correcting you. I'm not being mean to you. I'm straightening you out because you acted ugly back then, and I'm not going to put up with that. And you're going to have to learn to act right. And I've given you everything that you need to act right. But if you're not going to act right, it's not going to be comfortable for you. So we know the ways of God. And so there's no reason to have any doubts how things work. Now that was a long answer. Does love have anything to do with the temptation and obeying the commands of God? And so it's up to every person to get down to figure out how all that works. And we've all had now this other page, this little page you got here, I'll finish up that well. To take the sting out of evangelism. These are 6 principles of evangelism. First off, it starts with prayer. That's the first thing. We need to learn how to pray. Second is we learn the gospel as opposed to memorize the gospel. I don't believe in that. I did at one time, but people were too rigid. The second thing is learn to listen. Every book that was written on evangelism in the last couple of years, several years, 10 years, starts off, has a chapter in there on how to listen. You gotta learn to listen. There's several proverbs that says the person that answers a question before he hears the answer is not very smart. Actually, it says a fool will answer a question before he hears the question. And then fourth, hospitality is being able to let the person enter into your life. And the next one is telling stories. There was a man at the last church I was helping a few years ago. He started telling stories. He said, I have never led a person to Christ in my life. But he started telling stories, and he said, I didn't realize it was this easy to tell stories, tell Bible stories. Now on the other page, this is a scary page maybe, but it comes from learning salvation. You learn the doctrine of salvation. I started writing down words that I saw in the Bible that it described salvation. And you might come up with more, you might come up with less, but I come up with roughly 47 words that describe salvation, that deal with salvation. The next one is Old Testament. These are stories, these are 7 Bible studies that Jesus used and Paul used to explain salvation. Now the next one, these are words that I ran into primarily living in a Catholic country, about ideas that are thought to deal with salvation, but they're not. Infant baptism, legalism, losing your salvation, original sin, penance, purgatory, and sacraments. And then this is how the study goes, the definition of the word, scripture use, the understanding of salvation, and how it applies to evangelism. And then the most concentrated group of studies, words of salvation, is in Romans 3:21 through 4:25. If you understand Romans 3:21 through 4:25, you understand, in my thinking, the totality of salvation. It's all right there in those few verses. So the question is, what I was going to start doing is I was going to start with those 7 Bible studies with Abraham, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Day of Atonement, fiery serpent, Noah and the ark, and the Passover. Every one of those deal with salvation. It's an explanation of salvation. And then I would like for you to learn how to tell those stories. How to tell them. You don't have to explain the plan of salvation to anybody, but just tell the story to somebody. Practice telling a story. Practice telling it. I have a fellow, he kind of looks like Jed Clampett.
Yeah, that's hard to miss.
He's a tall, lanky guy. We were telling stories over at this other church over at Bell Road, and he got hung up on the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And that's his favorite story. He tells it all the time everywhere he goes. Now he does have an advantage. He does close-up evangelism, close-up magic tricks. So he's used to talking in front of people. Most people are not used to doing close-up magic tricks in front of people. But he'd go into McDonald's or just anywhere, and he'd start talking. He said, what would happen if somebody came in here and wanted 5,000 hamburgers? What would you do? He said, let me tell you what happened one time. And he said, now, I don't use the 4 spiritual laws or something like that, but I do see people come to Christ. He said, do you think I'm still doing evangelism? I said, you're doing it better than the majority of people I know. He said, you don't have to tell the 4 spiritual laws or steps to peace with God, but just tell your story. just tell the Bible stories. And he's real good at it. If you're around him 5 minutes, he'll be telling you the story of feeding the 5,000. And he'll tell it anywhere he goes, especially in a restaurant. He likes to go to fast food restaurants. And that's where he likes to tell the story. And you'll get in the habit. You say, well, I never have been able to do that, but you do. You do. If you have grandkids, you don't worry, oh, golly, I gotta tell the story of the Goldilocks and the Three Bears tonight. Please pray for me. I just have no idea. You have no idea the stress I'm under. You just tell it. We make too much of a big deal out of this kind of stuff. So it's gonna be moving in a little bit different direction. Not necessarily, but it's gonna be more of a what you do, not what you know. So much in a little bit of what we do, rather not be totally. We're gonna learn some things, but it's gonna be a little bit more what we do, not just sit and soak.